All right, well today we get to continue our imagination journey for June. And so I've titled this series, The Courage to Imagine. And I think a lot of this song, and Lisa picked that, we didn't coordinate, she picked that song, but I think it's such a perfect segue into what we're talking about here today. Having the courage to think about our lives and the world around us and see something different and new, and not just see it, but believe that it is so. That we don't see the poverty and the dissension and the strife and all the drama and trauma around and just say, it's always been like that. Look at the Bible. They've been dealing with it for, centuries. What are we supposed to do? How can we even begin to do this? And the song says, imagine. Therein lies the creative force. When we begin to use our minds, we are inheritors and in the flow of divine mind. And so when we put ourselves in that space and place to believe, to know, and to allow, then we transform not just our thinking, but the outpicturing in the world. So this month we're talking about that. How do we imagine doing these pictures, using our creative selves, using our creative core to express, but also to put something out into the world that changes the dynamic, that changes the narrative, that changes the understanding of what is accepted as so. It's the ability to allow for that idea that is divine spark. Last week we talked about how imagination is so part of innovation. And oftentimes we don't allow for spirit to speak to us. And I'm not saying like Jesus is saying to you, Mother Mary, listen up, everybody. I mean, some of us may receive messages that way, like literally hearing, but it can come in so many different ways, a bumper sticker, a billboard. Have you all ever been in a situation where you've been struggling with something or wanting an answer and it came in the most weirdest, mundane ways? A bumper sticker, anybody? And they're like, and you see it, like, just do it, or right, the Nike thing, you're like, oh God, all right, spirit, Sometimes it comes that way, but we have to be open, and not just be open, we have to be ready to listen and ready to execute. So that's part of the courage that we're talking about this month and what we talked about last month. What might happen if we trust that creative spark? What could happen in our lives if we actually listened and acted from those messages that we receive, even if they sound absurd, crazy, ridiculous, controversial, but we feel them? What could happen if we engaged? Today I'm going to be talking about imagination and universal creation. So last week we talked about our own lives, creating from our own lives, listening to our own intuition to be able to create new for ourselves, to innovate our lives. But today, we're going to be talking about what does that look like where we can use that energy to outpicture into the world, where we could maybe even entertain the idea that the energy that we create, that I create, that we create, can actually change. And I'm not talking about theoretically, I'm talking about actually in real time change the world. How might we entertain that could actually be so? Co-creating a new world, a new way, a new understanding as we co-create with divine mind. I got a little taste of that in remembrance just yesterday. We have a new board that we'll be installing today. And yesterday we had our first group training. We were working with a retired Unity minister who is also serving on the board for Unity Worldwide Ministries, Reverend Charlene Manuel. And we were talking about, board rules and board goals and things like that. But before we did that, she had us open up in a prayer circle. And we were all given the charge to pray with each other in a very specific way. And when we left that prayer circle, she asked us, how did we feel? what did we experience? And all of us were, in a sense, quite shocked, but also really excited and feeling that we were feeling this collective mind. You know, I remember Randy saying that he understood for the first time, maybe in a way different, that he was coming to the board not just as an individual, but we were a corporate body that we were sort of congealing. All of us together become this energetic force where we're sending out into this community, and by extension, sending out into the world, where we're moving together with a vision of how we can be in community and communing with each other, and then how we can do the work, the spiritual work. It was a beautiful reminder about that. One body, one mind, creating a sacred team, and with that, being able to then engage what in Unity we call the high watch, which is engaging from a higher consciousness, engaging from a higher vision, engaging from that Christ mind, a higher way of being. And so we kind of got that in that beautiful moment. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me personally. After we did the prayer a little while after, we had a break. And I decided that I was going to go out and check something on the property here. And as I walked out, I saw right on, as you exit sort of the fellowship hall from the back there, there's a set of stairs that lead to the house. And there was a hawk, huge hawk, just perched on the sort of stair, the border of the gate, the fence there. And I was caught off guard. Now, I've been experimenting and experiencing hawks here for the last couple weeks. I mean, all of you all know I'm a city girl. I don't know anything about birds and hawks and snakes and coyotes and all of these things I have experienced right here, by the way. In the last few weeks, I got the pictures to prove it. So it's been a new kind of excitement for me. So I started seeing hawks on the property, and I would hear them calling, and I didn't know what they were or what the call was until I got curious about what the sound was, and then I would go and figure out they were hawks. So of course, being the researcher that I am, I started looking up all of the things about hawks. And in the other times, I would come to the window, and I'm trying to open the window to take a good shot, not through the screen, and they would leave. They were sort of very in tune that I was there, and they sort of scattered off. But then something started to happen, actually. On Saturday, I came into the property driving, and Friday, I came into the property driving, and there were 2 hawks on the ground, and they were feeding by the peace pole that's out there. And so I thought, oh, this for sure, they're gonna hear me coming in, then I'm opening the door, because I'm like, I'm definitely getting the good shot now. And they just sort of looked up at me like, hey girl, what's up? Just hanging out, feeding, don't mind us, And so I got video and photographs. And then Saturday, the hawk is there. And he's just staring, he or she, I don't know what it was, just staring me down. And I ended up walking past it, and I was telling Vero this morning, my wife Veronica, that I don't even remember, because I was fearful of them when I thought about it, because I'd read that they could attack. And so I don't even remember going up the stairs, literally past it, as I was just ensnared in this glare with it, like just captured. And then I went inside, and I just said, before we start, something really exciting, I saw a hawk, And then Randy again says, I saw it before we started praying. I hadn't seen that. I took that as a sign, you all. Not everybody is into signs and wonders, but I surely am. And I take my nods from the culture that we are steeped in, that is all about, signs and wonders and symbolism. Hawks, let's think about this for a little bit. Hawks have excellent eyesight. They prey from hundreds of feet above to be able to hone in on what they want. They have excellent eyesight, up to 8 times more clearly than the sharpest human eye. Now, their hearing is super acute, so they can hear everything. Their smell is not so good, but their eyesight and their hearing is excellent. And of course, their speed is mighty. They can swoop down up to 150 miles per hour. So fast. And they see colors in the ultraviolet range, which means they see more color than even the human eye can see. A Canadian ornithologist recently decided that he was going to look at this idea of IQs in birds, and he determined that hawks had the highest IQ of any bird, any species. Hawks, it's about seeing from a different perspective for us. It's about seeing in a new way, seeing from that high watch, seeing from that power of observation. Because hawks are observant and they're clear-sighted and they are guardians oftentimes of memory, of farm memory. I looked up and I was interested to find out what hawks signified in other cultures over time, and I came to find out that hawks have been significant symbolically, spiritually, over all the world. Almost every culture has some historical, ancient connection with the hawk. In ancient Greece, hawks were associated with Apollo, the god of prophecy. He was also the god of sun and light, and so hawks represent all of these things. In ancient Egypt, they were considered a royal bird. They were closely associated with the gods Ra and Horus, and they are most distinctive and memorable in hieroglyphic symbols. If we look at certain tribes in the south of Africa, the hawks represent faith, and it's also considered to represent courage. And in parts of the Americas, the native Arawak people thought that the hawk was able to travel between the material and spiritual worlds and represented a link between the two, bringing messages to people from higher powers. All of this is ultimately telling us that animals, and hawks in particular, are of a higher plane and they're connected to this spiritual world as messengers. I believe that. Y'all don't have to believe a thing that I'm saying and just assume it was a cool experience and leave it at that. But even if you don't believe any of this, the reality is the hawk is the ability to see. It's a wonderful symbolism as we move forward in this idea of imagination this month and the imagination in our own world. If we think about this concept, the ability to see, we can look even in Scripture. You know, Jesus talked about this concept of the single eye. Does anybody remember that? The single eye. What does that mean in this context? So if we look at Matthew, it's both in Matthew and in Luke, but I'm going to do just a chapter here, a little brief passage. In Matthew, this is 6:22. It says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? What is this telling us? That what we see makes a difference. The perspective that we're seeing with makes a difference. So if we look out into the world and see doom and gloom, if we look out in the world and see that there's poverty and oppression and repression and think that's the way it's always going to be, I'm just little old me here in Nashville, what am I going to do? If we look out into the world and think there is only helplessness and hopelessness, then we're not seeing what we're supposed to see. We're not understanding this passage here. And it's difficult. I'm not going to say it's the easiest thing to do. We look at the television, right? We read the newspapers. Maybe we hear the radio, and things are happening in the world. Are they not? Are they troubling for some of you? Yes. Are they heart-wrenching sometimes? I've talked to people who said they were crying for days after the recent things happening in months. And that's okay. We all have to go through what we need to go through and feel what we need to feel, because sometimes these events become personal triggers for us, and they also then become personal ways of dealing with our grief and ways to then move to healing. But I also want to invite you all to see like the hawk from a higher perspective, to see with that single eye that Jesus is speaking of, which is the eye that only sees God. So no matter what is happening around you in your lives, in the world, you're using the power of imagination to vision something different. You're visioning something different into the world. You know, recently I was reading, there has been a number of studies now around the world about meditation. And meditation is a way many times of imagining. Because when you're meditating, you're in that space, you're in that divine mind, you're in that flow, you're in that clarity, right? As you let go to be able to see correctly. And so part of the meditation experience oftentimes can be very intentional, that you're meditating about world peace, or you're meditating about healing, or you're meditating about whatever the issue or case may be that you want to do. So research studies have actually found that meditation can change social circumstances. Can you imagine that? That scientists now can study places where there are big groups of meditators. So there's a kind of a mass of meditators that are actually meditating with a very specific kind of process and very specific goals and intentions. And they can document the changes in those areas where the meditators are, where there's less poverty, where there's less violence, where there's less social strife. Wow. Anybody shocked to hear that? It's shocking, and yet it's not, if we understand spiritual principle, because everything begins in the mind. We are creative beings, and so we begin by outpicturing, by imagining something different. If you see it right, then you set it right. If you see it right, then you set it right. It's right in its right course. So we don't look at the tragedy, we're going to look at the victory. We're not going to see the despair, we're going to see hope. And so on. Today, I want us to experiment with that a little bit as we move into meditation right now. You see the luggage that's up here. Those of you online, I think, can see that there's luggage all around here. We've collected this luggage for youth in foster care. May was the National Awareness Month for Youth in Foster Care. And as I've shared in other services, you know, I was a former foster parent, and I'm an adoptive parent of someone from foster care. And most people don't know the things that youth in care go through. You know, the assumption is that, well, they're there because they're abused or neglected or both. Many of these children have very tragic stories, horrendous stories that most of us could probably never even imagine. Being sexually abused at the age of 4. That was my first foster child. She was 12 and had been in care from 4 to 12. When she came to my house at the age of 12, after being in foster care for 8 years, she had 2 garbage bags. Let's think about that. You all have children or grandchildren? What do they have? Stuffed animals and cute little things and things that are theirs that they call, you know, part of their spirit. And she had none of that. And so I'm not the only one. This has been many all over the country, all over the world, folks that create this experience to be able to give new and gently used luggage to youth in care so that they may travel with dignity. And many things happen in their time. You think, okay, they're in care, they're with a foster parent. And I'm going to tell you all the truth. Many foster parents only do it for the money. I know that's probably going to get people mad. But I was a foster parent for years. I worked for 10 years with youth in foster care. I've heard the stories of how foster parents locked the refrigerator with locks, padlocks, to not allow them for food. Or when the social worker came, they would show they were in a bedroom, and then when the social worker left, there was 20 people in the house and they were sleeping on the floor. All of these are true stories that I have seen personally with my eyes. Children that are in hotel rooms being prostituted, in care, teenagers. I know that it's sort of sensibility for the church ears on Sunday, right? It's sort of like, ooh, is she really talking about this on Sunday? Yeah, I am, because that's the reality. However, What I want us to understand is that energetically we can begin to create, to imagine something else. I want each of you to take a look at this luggage. And I want you to look at one in particular that might catch your eye. Maybe there's a couple that catch your eye. Just allow yourself to sort of fixate and look at one in particular that might focus on. And now I'm going to just have you close your eyes with that picture. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes with that picture of the luggage that you see here. Maybe you didn't pick one, but just generally, whatever you're being called to. So just close your eyes for a minute. Take some beautiful, deep cleansing breaths. Allow yourself to connect to that one presence and that one power within. Allow yourself to relax and be part of that energetic flow, part of that divine mind, that universal allness, that wholeness, that oneness, that Christ consciousness. And as you do that, I want you to hold in your mind's eye that luggage. See it. And now I want you to see a child, the recipient of this luggage. Imagine in your mind's eye this child. What do they look like? Do you see their smile, beautiful eyes, shiny hair? What do you see? In your mind's eye, see the recipient of this luggage. And now in your mind's eye, I want you to tell that child the truth of their being. What do you want to tell them? What is the truth of who they are? You are the light of the world. You are God expressing. You are the infinite power of the Holy One. There will be more. There is more. What do you tell that child? To lift them, to give them that imagination, that vision that you hold for them, holding for them that vision with a mighty faith. And you tell this child that as they receive this luggage, it goes on the wings of angels. It goes on the speed of energetic light that we are creating here, that energetic soul force that we are creating here together. This luggage becomes the conduit for sending out our energy into the world, becomes a conduit for reminding and seeing right and setting right that regardless of what has happened, this child has a future. This child has divine power. This child is poised and ready, and that we as a community stand together in that energy field, loving them, protecting them, guiding them, supporting them. And we don't have to know their names, and we don't have to know their stories, and we don't even have to know what happens, but all we have to do is imagine and believe and feel and know. Take a deep breath and allow that to just be. Allow that mighty faith to rest in the silence. We give thanks today for this sacred opportunity to be the hands and feet of God. Sacred opportunities. We send out our love into the universe in the most mundane of things, luggage, but they go with sight. They go with the sight of the hawk, the high watch, the higher perspective. And we rest in this knowing. And so it is, and so let it be. Amen. Take a deep breath. We give thanks this morning for that.